Hey guys, it's Terin Humphrey from Humphrey's Gymnastics podcast. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist, a two-time Hall of Fame inductee, world champion, a two-time NCAA champion, and 11-time All-American. As an ex-gymnast, I wish Grip Ease would have been around when I trained. The ultimate healing hands for rips. It's an all-natural cream and your gymnast hands will thank you. Be sure to order yours today at www.mygripease.com. That's mygripeez.com or on Instagram. Don't wait, gymnasts all around the nation and world are replenishing, healing, and moisturizing their hands back to normal. Welcome to Humphrey's Gymnastics podcast. I'm your host, Terin Humphrey. We also have my friend, Alexis Breon Crockett from the University of Alabama. She will be with me today, helping me answer and ask some questions to my guest, Mike Gillette. This is an episode literally about the strongest man in the world, not just physically, but mentally. Please welcome my friend, Mike Gillette, to the show.
Welcome, Mike.
Be with you. Thank you.
Yes, we're excited to have you. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you for being here today. First, I want to give the audience a bit of background about you, Mike. You have a jam-packed background. I happened to meet you in Alaska working at gymnastics camp of all things. I don't know if you have a whole lot of gymnastics in your background, but your background is certainly impressive. He was Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Sylvester Stallone's former bodyguard, a former police officer, SWAT Commander, and Army Paratrooper, a performance coach for films such as Fast and Furious and Deadpool, as well as guitarist Cher, Pink, and Cyndi Lauper. Featured on TV shows such as Guinness World Records Unleashed, America's Got Talent, and the Go Big Show. The Go Big Show. Okay. Nutritionist for cast and reality TV show Fight Girls. Mike does training courses and workshops for big groups such as USA Gymnastics, Cirque du Soleil, Disney, Microsoft, the Army, United Airlines, U.S. Marshals, and so much more. A certified hypnosis, author of Mind Boss, which I actually happened to read last year. It's a book about changing your thoughts to transform your life. Mike, I can't name all of your accomplishments, but I hope I got on the big ones and the exciting ones for you. You are one amazing person. Can you tell the audience, how did you get started on all this?
My introduction to, we'll say, enhanced performance was really sort of a process that I was using to get myself over a childhood that had been very dysfunctional, full of violence, substance abuse, that culminated with me sort of assimilating a lot of self-destructive behavior. So in an effort to work through that, overcome that, I started looking around for potential strategies. And this was in the pre-internet age, and there wasn't a lot out there. Even the personal development movement really didn't have the traction or visibility that it does now. So, Tony Robbins was still just a young man toiling in obscurity. So I looked to the places that I thought might be helpful. And one of those areas was the martial arts, and not just the martial arts as, let's sign up for a martial arts class, which I did. And I became very involved in that world. But what I was more interested in is I was reading a lot of biographies, and this is like I'm 18, 19 years old at the time. And I'm studying the thought process behind a lot of the venerated masters of traditional martial arts systems and so forth. What was it that they knew? Because I had started taking martial arts, and my instructor was a diminutive Korean. And there were photographs of him on the wall of his studio. And, he's breaking bricks with his hand, and he's a small guy. He's breaking bricks with his head. And what is that? Is that physical? Is it mental? I just assumed that it was mental. And I kept seeing references to, the internal aspects of martial arts, the thought process, the attitudes one needed to have to be an optimal warrior. And that was sort of happening concurrently as I had decided that maybe there was a place I could pick up on a lot of this training for free, and that was the military. And they had offered to graciously pay for my college a few years down the road. So I went that route. And it was much more of an experiential introduction to the powers of the mind as opposed to a methodological way. So I was just sort of immersed in situations where if I was going to be successful, I had to figure out my own mind. I had to improve my own mind, learn how to be more intentional about directing it. And no one was really telling me any of this. I was just kind of stumbling forward. And it sort of worked. I encountered a lot of very formative mentors in the military, and that sort of followed me through my military experience. And I did well enough in the military that when I was released from active duty, I was still attached to the military. This gets sort of administratively boring, so I'll try to make it quick. But I was allowed to participate in a scholarship sponsored by the Army that would pay for my degree, and then I would come back in the military for X number of years on an active duty basis, only at a management pay grade. And that's all I wanted to do back in those days. I just wanted to live in the woods, jump out of airplanes, and be cool. And that was what being cool seemed to me in those days, because I was young. And I spent a semester in college post-active duty, and then I was involved in a rock climbing accident, broke my back, my ankles, and was immediately ineligible for continued military service because I was damaged goods. There was no indication at that time that I would ever overcome that condition. I was basically crippled up. So my wife at the time, well, it makes it sound like I'm divorced. We're still married. But my wife had to wheel me into the office where I was medically processed out. I signed the documents, while in a back brace up to here in a wheelchair. So it was a long way from the action guy that I'd kind of built myself into. And that was really sort of the next phase of my development. This is just one answer to a question. So pace yourself accordingly when ask the next one. Old people talk a long time. It's just a trait that they have. So I had this kind of wide open future of not being able to do what I wanted to do, what I sort of felt destined to do. And I didn't have a plan B. I was married. We had a baby who was about 6 months old, and I really didn't know how I was going to sort all of this out. And it started to occur to me that I really didn't want to do anything else. And maybe somehow I could just will myself forward to the active life that I had once aspired. And I started doing that. I was still in my back brace, still in cast, and I'm doing pull-ups on the pull-up bar in my closet at home. I did everything that I possibly could in my own mind. And again, I'm young and not conversant in anatomy and recovery and things like this. So I did everything wrong. And I continued to do everything wrong for about 4.5 years. I would go hard, and then my body would shut down. I would go hard, my body would shut down. It was just kind of mentally up and mentally down. Now, the entire time this was happening, I'm continuing that individualized research of mine. So I'm still reading about military science, martial arts, psychology, anything I can get my hands on. And it was a very sort of roundabout search, because all there was the public library and these things that they used to have at the mall called bookstores. And they used to have something called the mall too. But so it was just kind of me searching, not too strategically, but just being very immersed in the idea of trying to find a way forward. So after that stretch of time, somehow it worked. I finally got to the point where my body did start to recover, and it started to look as though I could move forward and reclaim my status as a physical being. And that's when things started to happen again for me. But there was this big lull between, a quick start out of the gate into the military, then the accident, then all of this time and kind of emotional no man's land before I hit sort of round two of who Mike Gillette was going to be. And I learned a lot from that. And it sort of reinforced for me the importance of figuring things out here and how all of this stuff up here basically navigates everything down below. So, everything from the neck up is really important because it drives everything from the neck down. And as I got into law enforcement, and it didn't take me long to get involved in training, meaning training other law enforcement officers, and then that led to training military units, and then all of the stuff that you alluded to during your very gracious introduction. And as I was navigating that world, I kept learning things that, while they were very relevant in the specific context of military service, law enforcement response tactics, there were other things that I knew would be important or helpful to all kinds of people, regular people or athletes. And I just kept filing all of that away, knowing that someday I'm going to take all of that information, everything that I've experienced, everything that I've learned, and I'm going to collect that into something that I want to share with the world. And I didn't know when I was going to do it or how I was going to do it, but it was 2012 when I kind of hit the wall with the Bodyguard world. That was about 5 years of very intense, travel and not having my own time for my own self. And it's just kind of a weird way to make a living anyway. It's just a very strange relationship to have with people. And I felt like it was time. So I basically walked away from what was an extremely lucrative job to becoming self-employed, knowing that sort of terror would motivate me to get moving. And it took a little while to figure out the business side of things, but here we are today, 10 years of being self-employed, of sharing those types of strategies, be it in person, online, digital programs, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we get to today.
I go on and on to my kids, my athletes, how your brain is a muscle too. You have to work your brain just as much as you work the physical part of your body, if not more. You can do your routines over and over, but if you don't have the mindset, it's not going to go anywhere. I actually met you on one of the lowest points in my life. I was actually going through a breakup when I met you in Alaska. And I just remember meeting you and being like, wow, this man literally changed my life because he's teaching me how to think different ways and how to get through certain things. So can you elaborate a little bit on how strong your brain needs to be and people searching for that other answer? Yeah, just elaborate a little bit on that.
Okay. First off, thank you very much for the nice comments. That's I'm grateful to hear that. The thing that you mentioned initially, this idea that we try to instill, whether it's us as parents, it's us as a supervisor in the workplace, it's us as a coach, to our athletes. When we talk about the importance of the mind in relation to the thing that we're doing, what's interesting about that is everybody, I think, understands that. Intuitively, we get that, they are inexorably connected. How could they not be? But when I talk to the average coach, when I talk to the average athlete, I'll sort of query them. Would you say that the mental side is fairly important? No. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I might say, well, how much? Is it maybe half of the performance equation? There's not a thing called the performance equation. It's just a way of articulating that. Oh yeah, 50%. Could it be more than that? Maybe. Yeah, it is. Could it be 75? Because I'm still asking, they'll tend to agree. But the idea is we see this as valuable. And although we see this as valuable, the average athlete, the average coach, for that matter, will say, what are you doing about that? We say this is important. How are you making that true? And that's sort of the gap that most people have. And I mean, it's an understandable gap. And we're talking about the mind. It's like, what is it? We could get 10 experts and they may not even come to a complete consensus on that. But from a functional perspective, where I like to start is just talking to people about what you mentioned, Terin, how you think. The idea for most people is, how I am is how I am. The thoughts I have, they're just bouncing around up there, and I wake up and I check my thoughts, and my thoughts tell me what kind of day I'm going to have. And a lot of people live like that. Basically, I woke up today, I was in a good mood. Maybe it'll be a good day. I woke up today and I was in a horrible mood. Why are you in a horrible mood? I don't know, but today's going to suck. It's whatever's happening up here, we just sort of, use that like a rain gauge, as though this is reality, as though this tells us how to respond, if that makes sense. And the biggest step I think that we can help anybody make, the first most important step, is let's think about all this as real estate, okay? And let's think of you as the property manager. You're actually in charge of this. Now, a lot of people don't live that way. A lot of people have never been told that they get to be in charge of all of this, those thoughts bouncing around, those feelings that they're noticing. But if you can get comfortable with that idea, you don't have to feel as though you can take immediate charge of it today, because it takes work. And it almost never gets to the point where you've got 100% control of it 100% of the time. I've never met that person. I'm pretty good. I'm consistent. I've also got a lot of time in doing this. But do I still notice the occasional distracting thought, the occasional troubling thought? I do. So it's not a question of, I've found the magic switch and boom, instant mind control. Everything going on up here is only what I want. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of what I want. It's much more of what I want than it used to be. But we want to start moving towards that. We have to get comfortable with the idea that we can start to become more proactive in managing all of this. And once we start doing that, then we can continue to do that. It's if somebody tells you that they're physically weak, and both of you come from a world in which you know how to make yourself physically stronger, you know that that's not a terminal condition. It's like, well, I'm weak. I'll always be weak. In your mind, thinking, I could show you a few things that would change that. But if they say, nah, I'll always be weak, you know that you're not going to make much progress unless you can get that person to adopt a different attitude about that. But as long as they're convinced that they can't get stronger, they're not going to do the things that will make them stronger. Conversely, if you have an athlete, we'll say, who's convinced that I get nervous before competition, I get nervous before a practice, I get nervous before being introduced to a new school. I'm just nervous. I'm always going to be nervous. Therefore, I don't feel comfortable doing gymnastics. I'm never going to enjoy gymnastics. And who said that being nervous was even a problem? Somebody must have, or someone just came to that conclusion. They just sort of started marching forward, making that more concrete and real over time. So first we confer ownership back onto to the person whose mind that we're attempting to assist, and then we start the process of making that come true. And it's just there are some ways that are easier than others, but there's no fast ways. And when we use cliches like journey, not a destination, that absolutely applies when we're talking about training the mind. I have a couple of people I've been working with consistently for years, and they're miles beyond where they used to be, but they are not yet where they want to be. And I think that's typical. It's like, talk to any strength athlete, like a power lifter. Are you as strong as you want to be? Not yet. Now, They may be insanely strong. They may be getting all kinds of accolades for how strong they currently are, but ask them if they're happy with where they are or they want to get stronger. They're always going to, I want to get stronger. Well, I want to be physically stronger. I want to be as strong as I can for as long as I can. I want to be as sharp as I can for as long as I can. I want to be as focused as I can for as long as I can. And am I focused enough now? Well, I'm pretty good, but I want to see where I can go. And if you are operating from that position of perpetual improvement, that's your strongest point of orientation, if that makes sense, because you're always just kind of like just a little more, just a little more. And that means that even when you're a mature individual such as myself, you're still looking for that improvement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What kind of exercises do you do with your athletes or actors or whoever you work with at the time? Are you big on goal setting? Do you do workbooks? Do you just talk to them? What kind of exercises do you do?
Great question. Lots of different ones. But let's get to the one thing that you mentioned, goal setting. If you think about the book Mind Boss, it's basically a goal setting book.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a little bit of philosophy, a whole bunch of goal setting, a few exercises mixed in there. And goal setting is such a maybe boring topic that it's easy to overlook it. One of the things that I'll typically do if I'm going to be working live with a group of athletes, particularly if it's going to be for more than just a single session, is I will have them come in with their goals, their personal goals for the season, and we'll sort of ruthlessly go through them. And the first thing that I'll do is I'll kind of deconstruct them just in terms of the language. And obviously we know that mechanically vague language isn't helpful when it comes to goal setting and so forth, and you can get pretty granular with that. So we'll look at how the goals might be improved upon, and then I'll have them come back with new recalibrated goals, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about things that are a little bit more amorphous, like expectations. And I'll oftentimes share this particular example. So there is a retired music professor. His name is Benjamin Zander. He taught at the New England Conservatory of Music, which is one of the most serious classical music schools in the United States. And the class that he was responsible for was the senior performance class, which is basically you spend your final year preparing for your senior recital. So in gymnastics terms, those are your 4 routines that you're getting as sharp as they can be, and we'll just call that senior recital. We'll call that the World Championships. It's like all the marbles. This is your thing. And there's considerable pressure for these musicians, because if you don't pass that class with a sufficient grade, you don't get your degree. And you're basically a performance major in almost every case at the conservatory, looking to get a gig, we'll say with the Chicago Symphony, something like that. You want to get in with a prestigious ensemble. So the thing that Zander was noticing is the awareness of the criticality of his class seemed to be present among his students literally in the first week. Like, they would come into class and they're already stressed out. It's September. They don't really need to be that stressed until early May. So he thought about this, and he came up with an interesting idea. Well, he and his wife, who was a practicing psychologist, came up with this idea. And he started giving this assignment. So everyone would come in, the seniors would come in first day of class in the fall. And he would give each one of those students an A. But there was a catch, and this was the catch. The students would have to write a paper. Dear Professor Zander, the reason I received this A, and they're writing it from the standpoint of the assignment is dated, their date of graduation. Okay, so it's their future self, right? It's 9 months down the road. So they have to sort of, future cast themselves into next May. Note that they've received this A grade, and now they're explaining why. The reason I received this A is because, and then, from there, it was incumbent on the student to talk about what their practice regimen would have been. Not just how many hours, but the specific, I was working on my fingering in passage, 64 because, the 30-second notes or blah, blah, whatever. I'm trying to sound like I know music. But they would break it down with as much specificity as they possibly could. And of course, what's interesting is that once you started implementing this exercise, the performance rates started to improve. So much so that he wrote a book about it, which, I bought. And people started referring to this idea as the Xander method. And I have initiated that idea with athletes in all kinds of different sports. Now, it ideally works when, I come in at the beginning of the season so that, the athlete has the time advantage to kind of, think in terms of that process. So in gymnastics, it would usually be at the end of the summer, so like everybody's figured out their new routines, their upgrades and everything else like that. And now it's just a question of, nailing those routines so that when the season starts, they're just going to be killing from Jump Street. So that would be an example. There are literally infinite exercises, a lot of which I have taken from other realms. And one of the things that makes me a bit of a contrarian is, obviously, I don't come from the typical sports psychologist background, and I don't espouse a lot of the conventional wisdom. So, for example, in gymnastics, there are a couple of subject matter experts. There's one in particular who's been around longer than anyone else, is about as famous as Kleenex within the sport, and has done a lot to move the sport forward. And I have tremendous respect for that individual. I'm very different from that individual, and most of the other individuals were all trying to copy that particular individual based on that individual's success. And one of the key things has to do with, I alluded to this a moment ago, the idea of being nervous. Someone must have told that athlete that that's a problem, that being nervous is bad. It could be problematic, but it doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't come from the sports world. I have forced myself upon the sports world. I've forced myself upon a variety of industries. But I come from military and law enforcement training. So imagine if I were to, stand in front of a room full of combat soldiers and start talking about the secret to optimal performance for them is to learn how to feel really good about what they're doing, to feel just super comfortable and confident when they're doing what they do. I mean, it would be imbecilic. They're going into situations that are, chaotic, rapidly evolving, and as dangerous as any danger could possibly be. There are people who are going to be trying to kill them. If I was convincing them or trying to that they just need to feel more confident, how? How do you feel confident when you just crashed the door and there's a room full of people that are trying to kill you before you try and kill them? It wouldn't make sense. So, my worldview has more to do with let's not chase the wrong thing.
I'm just kind of blown away with everything that you've been telling us and what I've learned about you. And I know we've been talking a lot about the mind and mindset. And so I have a question for you. Have you worked with any gymnasts that have had mental blocks? And I ask that because I had severe mental blocks that came out of left field, no reason why it happened. It was just one day I came in and was scared to go backwards, which, of course, with being in gymnastics, I need to go backwards. And it was at the peak of my career, and it kind of ended my Olympic dream. So I was curious if you ever worked with gymnasts or even athletes at a very high level that had mental blocks that were unexplainable, out of left field, and if they overcame it.
Yes, to several of those. So in gymnastics particularly, and that's sort of like the universal bugaboo. It's maybe I'm coming back off of an injury and it's throwing myself. To me, it's not going backwards. You're launching yourself into the unknown metaphorically. What's back there? I can't see it. It's scary. So the way that I typically approach that is by not approaching it specifically. A lot of people, look at the symptom, and the symptom is the thing, and maybe it is, and oftentimes it probably is. But one of the things I've noticed when it comes to working with athletes is that I just sort of accidentally found myself working with many more female athletes than male athletes. And I attribute that to it's different being a woman than it is being a man. And there are stressors present, expectations present that are real for females that guys just don't have to deal with. And one of the things that I noticed is I would work with high-level female athletes regardless of the sport, and they would be much more critical on themselves than mediocre male athletes. What I noticed is the average male athlete had an abundance of irrational self-esteem, if that makes sense. And you've been around guys, you've seen this, just the average guy that walks around, I am amazing. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's somebody who's probably not going to, come up against mental blocks. That also may not be someone who necessarily gets very far, because once you start testing yourself against people who are similarly gifted or, gifted beyond your current level, that's when a lot of people just give up. It's like, whoa, this is real. I'm no longer the coolest guy in the room. I'm done. But to get to the issue of blocks, one of the things that I have found is that if we make the block the issue, we start to elevate the block, whatever the presenting symptom might be. But we'll use blocks because that's a great example. Because they're kind of mysterious. They're not necessarily reasonable. I'm suddenly afraid of doing things that I've done before. The thing I'm afraid of is not the most dangerous thing I've ever done. That mathematically doesn't make sense. So rather than focus on the problem, I focus on how would you like gymnastics to feel? When you come in and train, how do you want it to be? So we kind of talk about where we want to go with it. And oftentimes I will never bring up, and this is something that, because it's usually the mother, because mothers are way more tuned into the mental aspect of athletes than a father would be. I just think it's an intuitive thing. The mother's like, well, did you talk about the block? No. When are you going to talk about the block? I don't know. Possibly never. And usually that's what happens, is we don't get into that because I don't care. And when I don't care about the block, the athlete starts not caring about it quite so much. We're making everything about the block. Okay, we know what you aren't comfortable doing today. Well, what are you comfortable doing today? What can we do that would just make you feel like a kick-ass rock star? Let's start there, and let's continue to build you up, and eventually you get to the point where, okay, I'm still not comfortable going backwards, but I'm going to try because I'm just going to. I'm ready to do that now. I've never been someone who's interested in enforcing that. I have a healthy respect of the fear response and the fact that different people need differing amounts of space to deal with that. And again, I come from a very practical place where, the very first people I trained, it was life and death stuff. So I never really worried about if you're feeling comfortable doing this thing. Your comfort, going and accomplishing the mission in a military context does not matter. Are you prepared, skill-wise? Have you been adequately trained? Yes. Okay. Do you know the steps? Can you perform the steps? Yes. Can you perform the steps under pressure? Yes. Are you still scared? I don't care. I'm not even going to ask because it literally doesn't matter. And when we can get athletes and regular people too comfortable with doing things that push them, even though they're a little bit scared, that I think is where our superpowers lie. I don't want to wait for fearlessness to happen. I want fearlessness to simply be a choice that people make. I'm just going to do the thing. Why? Because it's awesome. We know that gymnastics is the most cognitively demanding sport. We know it's the most dangerous sport. We know it's, so high stress, and it's this, and it's all of these things, but it's also amazing. Let's do what we can to get to the amazing part.
I love the different ways of thinking. Like, as a coach, you have to know that every athlete is not the same, and every athlete you have to approach differently. So I appreciate you hitting on that.
Yeah. And that's a challenge for a lot of coaches, particularly if they are former superstar athletes, because they sort of become captive to how they were taught, how they did it, rather than developing a diverse portfolio of skills to accommodate the diverse portfolio of athletes they are entrusted with.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. I have a more physical question. I see photos of you hanging cement blocks off your neck in one of your pictures. What does a typical workout look in your world?
When you see pictures like that, what you are not seeing is a photo. Oh, this is just me training today. I train myself so that I can periodically test myself. And that's what some of the more extreme things are. I mean, basically, they are a way of testing myself. And in my mind, one of the things that makes me, more unique in the marketplace as far as like mindset training is I don't see anybody else in that space testing themselves the way that I do. Now, granted, maybe that's not the most reasonable way, but everything that I say, I can back up just in terms of, anecdotal evidence. So that's what the extreme stuff that you might see on YouTube and so forth comes from. But as far as physical training, I have an approach to training that I call four-dimensional strength. And it's basically, I try to hit four qualities of physical strength. And one is what everybody does, and that's linear strength. That's movements that follow a linear path. If you do a pull-up, you do a push-up, you do a back squat, those are linear movements. Pretty much every exercise machine at any commercial gym is facilitating a linear movement. But the body is more complex than that. So I also look for helical movements or movements that occur on an arc. So anything that's rotational in nature, if you think about like a kettlebell swing, a lot of sports-based movements will basically work along the way that the human body is jointed, or the way that the spine serves as a vertical axis, allowing the body to rotate, or the body also hinges, obviously, at the hips. So there's linear strength, there's helical strength, there's velocity-based strength, which is anything that is done as fast as possible. So a lot of people that do CrossFit will do dumbbell snatches or overhead snatches. A lot of ex-gymnasts get into CrossFit because they look really good doing CrossFit, just because they've got baseline skills that no one else in the room has, and they also look like superstars. And they're also not afraid of hard work. So those types, the Olympic lifts, those are velocity-based movements. So if you want to be able to move yourself through space as fast as possible, that's the ticket. And then the final one also has roots in gymnastics, and that's postural strength. So what is postural strength? the iron cross. Okay. There's no movement, but there's tremendous amount of muscle activation, and a much less aggressive example would be like a plank. So it's stabilizing the body in space or, against gravity. So I like to have all of those elements present in my training. And sometimes my training might look, well, what's so special about that? That's a lot of people do that. That's true. Other times it's, what is he doing? Because I don't recognize any of that. So it's a combination of those things. And also I do have to make allowances for some of the impact related stunts that I do. So there's conditioning that happens, which is basically, getting comfortable with absorbing impact and that kind of thing as well.
Talk about your body. Like, how does it feel today now that you're a little bit older and from the accident and from everything? I'm being nice. And can you tell
there's no easy way to answer on that topic.
Yeah.
Can you tell the parents and athletes how important rest is? I know you touched on it a little bit, but how important is rest exactly? Because a lot of the big time athletes, they don't want to take that rest because they're afraid they're going to lose everything. But on the contrary, it's actually really good. So I would like for you to maybe tell the parents and coaches and athletes, the opposite.
Yep.
Well, there's the only way to stay active long term. So I'll be 61 in 4 days. So
Wow.
I'm still as active as I can possibly be, but I have incurred injuries along the way, not just the climbing accident that was, a pretty obvious one, but I've torn both biceps and had both of those reattached, and both of those came after the age of 50. So getting over surgery at any age is not guaranteed. But if I wasn't smart in how I trained, I couldn't. This may sound confusing. If I wasn't smart about how I trained, I wouldn't be able to do the crazy things that I do.
Yeah.
The crazy things I do put considerable wear and tear on the structure, and the only way to do that and not have problems doing that is the exact same way that you intelligently train a gymnast. One of the things I've noticed about gymnasts is that they are chronically overtrained. My introduction to that sport came in 2012. It was just one of my side hustles. I started doing strength training at a gym that ended up a couple of years later becoming the top JO program in the US. When I got there, I was shocked at what they were making those kids do every day. 45 minutes of conditioning, 6 days a week. That's on top of, it was a 4.5 hour practice, 6 days a week. These were just JO kids. And their warm up would flatten most athletes. Their conditioning was crazy, and it was just tons and tons of reps, tons and tons of impact, and not surprisingly, tons and tons of injury. When I started working there, and it was about a 3.5 year stretch, one of the things I was most happy about is that injury rates went way down. And it's, the overall training volume went down. We didn't do as many repetitions. We moved heavier weights. We would, hey, why is Gillette letting everybody stand around for a couple of minutes? Well, it's because we're resting before the next thing. And it's like, why is he doing that? We got to go. No, not always. So it's not just recovering after practice, ice, hot tub, whatever, replenishing electrolytes, all of those sorts of things, getting in a lot of protein to fuel those muscles. But even when you're actively training, you don't have to be doing, that CrossFit tempo level, death march. Just, I'm not puking yet. I need to keep going harder, whatever. And I was a CrossFit coach at one of the most intensive CrossFit affiliates in Vegas for several years. So, I know that world, and I also know how seductive that world can be, because, for the people who aspire to be fire breathers, you gravitate to that, just go. And you start becoming accustomed to the discomfort. And former athletes who then discover CrossFit are dangerous because they're not afraid of the pain. They're not afraid of the unknown. It's like, I'm getting lightheaded. I'll be fine, and they just go harder. I'm a guy who, in his late 50s, inadvertently got himself hospitalized with rhabdo. So I understand that. And that was something I would never do because I was too smart, right? So it's like, it can happen. And so I'm just going to go just a little harder. I'm in no danger. The reason that this muscle tore is I was teaching somebody a jujitsu arm bar, and he had both of his arms on my arm. He's hyperextending my elbow. And because my pain tolerance is so skewed, I didn't realize I was in any trouble. No, let me just see if I can muscle out of it. I know I can't, but let me just see how long I can hold on, And he's like going as hard as he can with two arms, much bigger guy, much younger guy than me. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. Until we both heard the snap. And I was like, oh, that can't be good. And it wasn't. So it's easy, even for somebody who knows better, to ride that line, just a little too close to the edge. So we need to recognize that the line is there, and we need to respect that line, so that we can train as long as possible. Because even though I've been the fortunate recipient of genius level orthopedic surgery, it's still never a guarantee, that you can come back and, can continue to sort of, push reality with your physical self. And so I'm very aware, and I'm very grateful of the fact that I still get to be me and do the kinds of things that I like to do, because it's an important part of my life and who I am. It's important when you're a much younger person and you just want to enjoy your sport. So recovery is huge. Training intelligently is huge. Finding the right coach is huge. I mean, there's a lot of coaches that can turn you into an animal, but they'll have a high cost. There's a lot of animals that didn't survive their process. And I grew up in the state of Iowa, where wrestling is not just a sport, it's a religion. And I attended a high school that produced a couple of Olympians. Almost the entire starting lineup at the University of Iowa in 1980 was made up of graduates of that high school. And, it's like, even when I was young, I saw sort of an adherence to intensity that was just not common. And obviously that's a sport where, throwing up is kind of a badge of honor, and passing out is no big deal. And, get up and quit stalling, get back to work. You can rest some other time. So all of that is a big deal. I think it's particularly a big deal in the sport of gymnastics, because when you combine a tremendous volume of effort with a sport that is so rigorously defined by precision, that's a hard balance to draw, because gymnasts train really, really hard, and yet what they need to do is so precise that it's easy to take an athlete past the point of being capable of rendering a precise routine, because you've just smoked them. And sometimes we smoke athletes because we don't really know the best way to get the result. Just endless repetitions. I'm aware of famous coaches in the sport that use exercise as a punishment, which is extremely confusing to me, because why would you want to make that connection in the athlete's mind? But it happens. There's a lot. There's a lot of interesting approaches, because there's. I think because it's kind of a closed society. It wasn't until very recently, I think, that notes sharing really started becoming more prevalent and more healthy. We've got guys like Tilly out there that are really banging the drum at physically more sensible ways of achieving goals rather than, just endless repetition and wiping kids out, that sort of thing.
What is one thing you want young people to understand or know about life?
To know about life? Okay.
That's a hard one.
Wow, you didn't even give me a warm up. Here we are. We just went very big picture very quickly. It's a good question though.
Yeah.
What I try to put across to people with respect to life is that since life is a finite experience and the clock is always ticking, I think it's our responsibility to do our very best in terms of developing ourselves, and not to develop ourselves selfishly, not just, look what I can do, but look what I can do in terms of trying to be an example of excellence. Because I think the more excellence that we embody, we create, we normalize excellence. And I don't think that's a thing right now. I think right now we're normalizing mediocrity. We're really getting good at, it's okay, most things are hard, and life is stressful, and it's okay. I mean, I don't want young people to be inordinately stressed, but I don't want them to be inordinately complacent.
Yeah.
I think that most of us are happiest when we feel that we're challenging ourselves, when we're growing. And that's not just good for us as individuals. That's what's best for the world. If everybody is out there being, to borrow the cliche, the best version of themselves, that makes the world a better place to be. That improves everything for everybody. So that's how I would answer that question, at least today.
I love that answer. That was a great answer.
I'll ask you a more easy question. So what does life look for you these days? I know when I catch you, you're always with your grandkids or you're traveling. What do you do from day to day?
What I try to do from day to day, above and beyond the sort of elastic nature of what it is to be a digital entrepreneur, because I found when I went to work for myself that I don't have any time off. There's always something to do, and there's B, always something I'm trying to figure out how to do. So a lot of what I notice these days is me trying to figure out how to do what I do better, meaning how can I find a better way to share information? How can I make a bigger impact? And when I first started training other people, I was teaching a variety of, physical skills primarily, to cops, military personnel. And I described that part of my life as, that was back when I was trying to save the world. And then I sort of transitioned into, now I'm trying to teach other people how to save the world. And save the world, is much more metaphorical, So I spend a lot of time trying to reach people, to help them learn all of the things that I've learned, so that there's a means of passing this on, so that there's a legacy component attached to what I do, because none of this really matters if it all dies with me, if that makes sense. And the things that I have found, helpful or valuable, I have found to be helpful or valuable in a variety of ways, not just, for those people who just want to be super high achievers. But, you mentioned when we met, when we were talking, that what I was sharing was sort of being applied in your mind at the time to more personal relationship stuff that you were dealing with. And I think that, regardless of what a person is going through, challenges at work, challenges at home, challenges with just figuring themselves out, everything, goes back to the mind. How are we thinking about the world? How are we thinking about ourselves in the world? And can we improve on that at all? So I'm still very much involved in that space, while simultaneously, trying to enjoy the fruits of that effort too. So, that extends to relationships with friends and family and that sort of thing. So I like to enjoy being me, and I like to share what I've learned being me. That would be the concise way of answering that.
That's great. Okay, so we're almost to the end, but if somebody wants to book you for motivational speeches, or they want you to coach their athlete, or just a normal person, or where can they get a copy of Mind Boss?
The simplest way to find me is not through any of my myriad websites, because those change depending on what product is being promoted by my business partner. So the simplest way to find me is on social media. So I've got personal Facebook page, professional Facebook page. I'm on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel. I can be messaged through any of those. That's probably the easiest way to find me. The Mind Boss, the book, is not currently available right now. You can find it used, but you'll pay way too much for it. I'm in the process of the second edition of it. And so it'll come out, it'll have a different title and so forth. But if anybody just absolutely has to have it, I can probably set them up with a PDF copy if they just simply reach out.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we're going to end. We like to leave on a little bit of a silly, light note. So this is going to be a silly question for you, Mike. But
okay.
Well, okay. Are you ready?
I don't know. Let's let her prep.
Already. What song would make the best theme music for you?
Ooh.
Okay. Wow.
I was thinking Eye of the Tiger, but
okay, that's reasonable, but that's almost a bit obvious. I'm trying to think of something a little less so. Boy, you caught me a little bit stumped.
We got him.
If you asked me about someone else, I would probably come up with, oh yeah, this person should be this song or that person should be that song. But in my case, I don't know. I'm going to have to give you something. I don't want to let you down. So be like a faith-based song. It would just be something along the lines of how I try to think of myself, just in terms of remembering to stay humble, particularly when a lot of what I do seems to be kind of chest thumpy.
Yeah.
And hey, look at me. And a lot of that stuff can sort of be easily misunderstood. Mm-hmm. So, when I think of songs that I aspire to, in terms of how I would try to describe myself, might be a song like In Christ Alone, or, I Can Only Imagine, just contemplating things that are bigger than myself.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great answer.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Mike, for being...
Also, Eye of the Tiger. Okay, so we'll just...
Okay. That's very obvious, though. We already knew that. Yeah.
Playing in the background. So when you work out. All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for being here. On our next episode, we will be speaking with my fellow 2004 Olympian teammate, a model, a gym dad, a gym owner, and a former college coach, Blaine Wilson. Remember that send in those questions, topics you want to discuss, or would like to be a sponsor, go to our YouTube channel. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all for listening today. And for all you gymnasts, coaches, don't forget to go to www.mygripease.com. That's mygripease.com to order your replenishing, healing, moisturizing hands back to normal.